starting with number 1, Boeing P-26 Peashooter, United States, 1934. By December 1941, the P-26 had already been in service for 7 years. When Japan struck the Philippines, Philippine Air Force pilots were still flying Peashooters against modern A-6M0s. The open cockpit, fixed landing gear, and light armament belonged to a completely different era of warfare. Against the Zero in a turning engagement, there was no realistic path to survival. Pilots who launched to meet the Japanese attack in P-26S understood the odds, and many did not return. 2. Seversky P-35, United States, 1937. The P-35 had represented American fighter technology at the leading edge of its time, but by late 1941, it was acutely outmatched. Use-off examples in the Philippines were destroyed on the ground and in the air within days of the Japanese attack. The aircraft lacked pilot armor, had no self-sealing fuel tanks, and could not match the speed or maneuverability of contemporary Japanese fighters. Flying a P-35 in combat against experienced Japanese aviators offered almost no margin for survival. 3. Douglas TBD Devastator, United States, 1937. The Devastator was built around torpedo attack, a role requiring straight, level flight at low altitude, directly toward defended ships. By 1942, against Japanese combat air patrols, that profile was a death sentence. At Midway in June 1942, Torpedo Squadron 8 launched 15 aircraft and none returned. Across all 3 torpedo squadrons that morning, 35 of 41 aircraft were destroyed. Entire crews perished within minutes of engagement. The Devastator was withdrawn from combat operations immediately after the battle. 4. Brewster F-2A Buffalo, United States, 1939. America's first monoplane carrier fighter. The Buffalo was completely outclassed by the time it reached serious combat. At Midway, Marine pilots flying Buffaloes engaged Japanese Zeros and were systematically destroyed. 13 of 19 aircraft were shot down in the engagement. Surviving pilots reported that turning to fight was pointless. The aircraft was too slow, too heavy, and too limited to compete at any meaningful level. One pilot described it simply as a death trap. Its combat record stands among the most dismal of any American fighter in the war. 5. Curtiss SO-3C Seamew, United States, 1942. Designed to replace the older SOC Seagull, the Seamew proved dangerous almost immediately after reaching fleet units. Poor stability, unpredictable handling, and a tendency toward irrecoverable spins during routine maneuvers alarmed pilots across the Navy. The service's response was unusual in its clarity. The Seamew was retired and the Seagull was brought back, reversing the procurement decision entirely. That reversal stands as one of the more damning institutional judgments ever rendered against an American naval aircraft. 6. Bell P-39 Airacobra, United States, 1941. The Airacobra positioned its Allison engine behind the cockpit, driving the propeller through an extension shaft to allow a 37mm cannon to fire through the propeller hub. The result was an unconventional center of gravity that made the aircraft dangerously unstable in a spin, and recovery from that spin was nearly impossible. Use-off pilots were formally cautioned against certain maneuvers. Hundreds of P-39s were lost to spin accidents during training and operational use, entirely separate from any combat loss. 7. Consolidated PBY Catalina, United States, 1936. Invaluable for reconnaissance and rescue, the Catalina placed its crews in an almost untenable operational position. Slow and large, the PBY had no ability to outrun or evade Japanese fighters. Crews on extended Pacific patrols flew directly through enemy operating zones with minimal defensive armament. Multiple Catalinas were intercepted and destroyed before a distress call could be transmitted. The men who flew them accepted a simple reality. If an enemy fighter found them, there was no meaningful means of escape. 8. Douglas A-24 Banshee, United States, 1941. The A-24 was the Army's land-based version of the Navy's SBD Dauntless, a creditable naval aircraft that proved catastrophic when deployed without the fighter escort naval doctrine demanded. In the Philippines and Dutch East Indies in early 1942, A-24s were sent against Japanese targets with virtually no protective cover. Of 7 attacking a Japanese convoy in the Makassar Strait, 6 were shot down. The aircraft was not the failure. The Doctrine that sent it unescorted was. 9. Vought F4U Vengeance, United States, 1942. The Vengeance arrived at a point when combat experience had already established that dedicated dive bombing was unsustainable without consistent fighter cover. Cover the aircraft rarely received. Slow and minimally armed for self-defense, it could not survive over defended targets. American forces deemed it unsuitable for frontline operations and transferred the majority to Allied air forces. The few that flew American combat missions suffered losses entirely disproportionate to any tactical result they produced. 10. Martin B-26 Marauder, United States, 1941. No American combat aircraft compiled a darker training record. The B-26 high-wing loading demanded precise, fast approach speeds at every landing. Any deviation was catastrophic. At MacDill Army Airfield in Florida, accidents occurred at the rate of roughly 1 per day during peak training periods. Crews called it the Widowmaker, the Flying Prostitute, and the Baltimore Whore. Congress opened a formal investigation. Its combat record ultimately improved, but the training fatalities were permanent, and no operational success could reclaim them. 11. Brewster SB2A Buccaneer, United States, 1942. The Buccaneer arrived so overweight and underpowered that it never flew a combat mission under American colors. Test pilots found it sluggish, structurally questionable under stress loads, and comprehensively outperformed by the aircraft it was supposed to replace. The Navy declared it unfit for frontline duty almost immediately. Hundreds were produced, most finished as trainers, where their difficult handling characteristics continued to generate accidents. The program represented a layered failure across design, manufacturing, and procurement decision-making at every level. 12. Lockheed P-38 Lightning, United States, 1941. Outstanding as an air superiority platform, the P-38 harbored a lethal flaw in high-altitude steep dives. As speed increased past certain thresholds, airflow over the wings went transonic, causing the elevators to reverse in a phenomenon engineers called compressibility tuck. The nose pitched sharply downward, and pulling back on the controls made the dive worse. Experienced pilots died in unrecoverable dives before the cause was fully understood. A dive recovery flap was eventually developed, but significant losses had already accumulated before it reached operational units. 13. Vought F4U Corsair, United States, 1943. Fast and powerful, the Corsair's initial carrier suitability was catastrophic. Enormous torque from the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine demanded constant correction on takeoff. Stiff landing gear caused dangerous bouncing and cartwheels on carrier decks. Forward visibility during approach was critically restricted by the aircraft's tail-down deck attitude. Early carrier qualification training produced alarming accident rates. The U.S. Navy barred the Corsair from fleet carrier operations entirely and assigned it to Marine land-based units instead. Significant modifications were required before it was ever cleared for shipboard service. 14. Curtiss SB2C Helldiver, United States, 1943. The Helldiver replaced the trusted SBD Dauntless and immediately generated deep hostility among the pilots assigned to fly it. Longitudinal instability, violent stall behavior, and a flat spin tendency made it one of the most disliked carrier aircraft in the entire Pacific Fleet. Over 880 design changes were required before it entered service, years behind schedule. Crews named it son of a bitch second class. Even after those modifications, it remained structurally unpredictable under genuinely demanding operational conditions. 15. North American A-36 Apache, United States, 1942. A ground attack variant of the early P-51, the Apache was fitted with perforated dive brakes designed to control terminal velocity during attack profiles. Those brakes produced severe airframe vibration in service, disturbing enough that many pilots disabled them and flew without them entirely. operating at low altitude over defended targets made the aircraft acutely vulnerable to ground fire. Loss rates in the Mediterranean and Burma theaters were significant, and the aircraft's brief service career ended before its core problems were ever properly resolved. 16. Consolidated B-24 Liberator, United States, 1941. Produced in greater numbers than any American aircraft of the war, the B-24 was operationally essential, but significantly less forgiving than the B-17 it frequently flew alongside. Its narrow Davis wing provided minimal structural margin under combat damage, and the aircraft was more susceptible to fire and harder to control with multiple engine failures. Ditching at sea was considered near unsurvivable by experienced crews. At the low-level Ploesti raid in August 1943, 54 of 177 attacking aircraft failed to return. 17. Curtiss C-46 Commando, United States, 1942. The C-46 flew the hump, the Himalayan supply corridor from India to China, one of the most hostile operating environments of the entire war. Early variants carried a fuel system prone to vapor lock and in-flight fires, and several aircraft exploded without warning. Crews called it the Curtiss Calamity. Combined with extreme mountain weather and sustained high-altitude operations at the absolute edge of the aircraft's capability, the total loss rate over the hump was among the highest sustained by any transport aircraft in the conflict. 18. Martin PBM Mariner, United States, 1941. The Mariner performed long-range maritime patrol across the Pacific and Atlantic on missions lasting 12 to 16 hours over open water. Early production variants suffered recurring engine fires, and the aircraft was demanding to control during rough sea water landings and takeoffs. Several were lost to mechanical failure in mid-ocean, well beyond any realistic range of rescue. For PBM crews, the operational reality was straightforward. An emergency over the open Pacific, regardless of cause, offered almost no survivable outcome. 19. Boeing B-29 Superfortress, United States, 1944. The most advanced bomber of the war, the B-29 was also one of the most dangerous to its own crews. Its Wright R-3350 engines ran chronically hot and routinely caught fire in flight. Magnesium components in the engine nacelles ignited easily and could not be extinguished once burning. The XB-29 prototype itself crashed during testing in February 1943, killing Chief Test Pilot Edmund Allen and 10 crew members. Engine fires remained a persistent and documented threat throughout Pacific operations, claiming aircraft and crews independent of any Japanese defensive action. 20. Convair B-32 Dominator, United States, 1945. Developed as a contingency program alongside the B-29, the B-32 reached Pacific operations in 1945, still carrying unresolved mechanical issues. Its brief combat record was marked by unreliability and accidents. On one of its final missions, a Japanese fighter attack killed a crew member, placing him among the last Americans to die in aerial combat during the entire war. The program ended with Japan's surrender, leaving the B-32 as a direct record of what results when development pressure prevents the proper resolution of engineering problems. 21. Northrop P-61 Black Widow, United States, 1944. America's first purpose-built night fighter was effective in its intended role, but not without serious internal hazards. Early P-61s suffered dangerous aerodynamic buffeting when the dorsal gun turret was operated at speed, generating structural stress severe enough that the turret was locked out on certain production variants. Its size constrained maneuverability in close engagements. Flying radar-guided night intercepts demanded extreme crew coordination under complete darkness, and the margin between a successful engagement and a fatal navigational error was narrower than combat reports typically acknowledged. 22. Curtiss O-52 Owl, United States, 1941. The O-52 entered service at precisely the moment combat experience was making slow, low-flying observation aircraft unsurvivable over defended territory. Minimal speed and negligible defensive armament left it entirely exposed to interception. The Army Air Forces recognized quickly that it had no viable frontline role, and withdrew it from combat assignments before it could accumulate significant losses. Its brief active history serves as a clear record of a design rendered obsolete, not by any engineering failure, but by the accelerating pace of modern aerial warfare. 23. Ryan PT-22 Recruit, United States, 1941. More demanding than the forgiving Stearman biplane it supplemented in primary training, the PT-22 had abrupt stall behavior and snap-spin tendencies that gave inexperienced cadets minimal margin for recovery. Training accidents involving it contributed to a domestic fatality toll that exceeded 15,000 American servicemen killed in stateside training accidents throughout the war. Aircraft with no tolerance for student error were a consistent factor in that number, and the PT-22, flown by pilots with only weeks of experience, carried a disproportionate share of that cost. 24. Curtiss SB2C Jeep, United States, 1942. The SB2C was deliberately designed to challenge. The Army Air Forces required a twin-engine transition trainer that would expose student pilots to the demanding characteristics of frontline combat aircraft, and the Jeep delivered that difficulty with genuine danger attached. Engine-out handling was hazardous. Stall behavior was abrupt. Underpowered for its weight, it offered minimal margin for error. Instructors accepted the inherent risk as a necessary cost of preparation, but the accident record reflected exactly what that philosophy extracted from the men who flew it. 25. Brewster F4U Corsair, United States, 1943. Brewster Aeronautical produced a license-built version of Vought's F4U Corsair and layered catastrophic quality control failures onto a design that was already unforgiving for carrier operations. Navy inspectors found chronic workmanship defects throughout Brewster's production line. Mis-installed components, structural inconsistencies, and assembly errors that introduced independent danger beyond any flaw in the original design. The Navy never permitted F4U Corsairs to enter frontline combat service. Brewster's contract was canceled in 1944 and the company shut down entirely, its manufacturing record beyond salvage. 26. Bell P-39 Airacobra, United States, 1943. An improved successor to the P-39, the Airacobra corrected some of its predecessor's most critical stability problems, but American planners still placed limited confidence in it as a frontline fighter, sending the vast majority of production to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease. A program designated RP-63 reveals the full extent of that limited trust. Modified Airacobras were used as manned aerial targets, struck by .30 caliber frangible bullets during live gunnery training. American pilots flew them not to engage the enemy, but to absorb practice fire. 27. Curtiss XP-55 Ascender, United States, 1943. The XP-55 used a swept-wing, canard configuration and rear-mounted pusher propeller, a design that challenged the fundamental principles of stable flight. Testing revealed it was prone to sudden, violent nose-drop stalls with no warning and no recovery pathway. In November 1943, the second prototype entered an inverted flat spin during a public demonstration at Wright Field and crashed, killing the pilot. The program was canceled without a path to operational service, having demonstrated that radical innovation without solved stability is not an advance. It is a different category of hazard. 28. Fisher XP-75 Eagle, United States, 1944. Promoted as a rapid production long-range escort fighter assembled from components of existing aircraft to accelerate development timelines, the XP-75 proved genuinely hazardous in testing, unstable in flight, prone to uncontrollable rolls, and extremely difficult to abandon safely in an emergency. It alarmed the test pilots assigned to evaluate it. Multiple prototypes were destroyed in crashes during the development phase. The program was canceled in late 1944 without entering production, having consumed considerable wartime resources and pilot lives without delivering a single combat-capable aircraft. 29. McDonnell XP-67 Moombat, United States, 1944. The XP-67 featured a blended fuselage wing profile that anticipated post-war aerodynamic thinking, but its Continental 11-1430 engines were incapable of sustaining reliable flight. In-flight fires occurred on multiple test sorties. Each incident grounded the program further. In September 1944, an engine fire during the landing roll destroyed the sole prototype and ended the program definitively. The XP-67 never came close to its design performance targets, having demonstrated only that an advanced airframe paired with a power plant that cannot be trusted is not an aircraft. It is a sustained hazard. 30 Douglas BTD Destroyer, United States, 1944. Designed to replace the Helldiver as the Navy's primary carrier strike aircraft, the BTD entered testing and failed to meet requirements across multiple categories. Performance was insufficient, low-speed handling was poor, and its Wright R-3350 engine brought the same chronic reliability problems that afflicted the B-29. The Navy canceled the program before a single aircraft reached an operational squadron. The BTD represents a pattern that emerged more than once in American wartime procurement. Advanced designs developed under pressure that consumed substantial resources without contributing a single operational sortie to the war they were built to fight. If you liked the video, let us know in the comments. If you found any mistakes or have suggestions, share them below. Please consider subscribing. Your support helps us grow.